Hello and welcome back to another video for the scene editor for Mount and Blade to Bannerlord. Today's video is going to be about how you add an outer mesh to your map. And if you're not familiar what an outer mesh is, it is the background for your map. It is basically the illusion that your world continues sort of forever. And there are basically three types. Two of them are entities and the third one is an option within the select terrain. So I'm going to cover all three types and talk a little about what the problems are with each one and whatever benefits there are. So we're going to add an outer mesh to our little test world here and see if we can improve the background. So you would have to select a new entity. You just add entity and you use the filter to type outer, or you could type anything more. So first we will have a look at the first type of outer mesh, and it is the outer mesh three-sided and the outer mesh A. And you can sort of see the idea here that this three-sided outer mesh is only covering three sides of our map. So you could use T to raise it, of course, but it's a little faster to just place it and move it around. So you can see that this one is actually a little too small for our map, so we can just use B and increase it. If you click B, you can of course stretch the entity, and you can do this for all types of entities, but again, I don't recommend that. Now, one very important thing to keep in mind when you add an outer mesh is blending with your terrain, because that is not going to look very nice in your map. So you're going to use some hills or rocks. Perhaps you want to create your own mountain near the edge to sort of hide the outer mesh not being a part of your map actually. So this is the first type. That is one thing you should try and avoid is clipping like that, where the terrain sort of floats. There are other types too, other ways to sort of change it, but you can just click and hold down N and you can lower your terrain again. But let's just keep it up a little, something like that. So when you want to retexture your outer mesh, you click on it and you go to components, and you can see under materials that you have a texture selected. So let's try and change it to a valley. Now there's two different types of this texture, and I know one of them has snow on the tops, the peaks of these small mountains, and the other one doesn't. You can of course, if you increase it even more with the B, make the mountains look much larger. So you will have to decide on a size from the get-go, because at least in my opinion these mountains look a little small. Perhaps not. I guess they look alright. Anyway, so that's the way you would retexture the first type of outer mesh. And just for the sake of it, I will also show you the other one. Like before, you can see that there's basically a cutout for a map like ours, a square shape. And unlike the other one, this one is actually a little better sized, And again, when you place these, don't really keep in mind how they look from the get-go. Of course, if you can find one that you like, it's very good, but you can change the look by changing the texture. So something like before. And last video I showed you how you can retexture an entity, like we did with this little shrine, and you can of course do that for the outer meshes as well, as they are just entities. But I think you should be very careful when you do that, because the results are not always great. But let's say we have changed our atmosphere to a sunset, so perhaps it would naturally light better on it, but maybe we want it to look more red, so perhaps something like that. So you can sort of see that it is the sun reflecting here. In a later video I will of course talk a little more about atmosphere, so it's just a nice little tip if you want to change the color a bit more for your outer mesh. Anyway, let's move on to the other type of outer mesh you can use, and it is the remaining ones. So these ones, I'm not actually sure if this one works. Doesn't seem to work. I can't see anything, at least. I'm not sure if it's bugged or if there's some sort of script or anything you would have to activate before this works. But let's have a look at the other types. So there's a desert type 1 and 2, or B as it's called here. It's a little hard to see anything, but you can of course lower and raise the ground like the other type. So let's just place this one and test around with it. Now, unlike before, it's not one entity but actually several combined, but they are by default locked together. So when you click on it, you can sort of see there's all these type of squares, and sometimes when you mouse over some of them you can actually see it highlighted. So because of the prefab, we are moving all of the entities at the same time. One thing to keep in mind when you use this type of outer mesh is that you would try to avoid clipping with your own terrain, unless you want to cover it up somehow. I've seen some Bannerlord maps that don't really mind clipping with the terrain. Personally, I don't think it looks very well, especially if you can actually see it when you play around in your map. That is probably the worst that can happen for an outer mesh, at least. I actually kind of like that. It looks like a little river over there. Now the problem with this type of outer mesh is that it is a little harder to retexture, and I will show you how you do it. So you go down to your scene and you can see all your entities within your map, and you will have to find your outer mesh, whatever it's called, and sort of open it up, and you can see that each of these are separate entities, which also means that you would have to retexture each one. I've tried to find a way so you could just change one of them, or all of them at the same time at least, but I haven't figured out a method to do that yet. I think the main problem is that it is different entities with different names. So let's try to change the center outer mesh. Just like before, you go to components and materials, and you will have to find your texture. Let's try and change it to step, So you can sort of see the problem here that the other entities have not been changed texture-wise. So we go back to our center one. Now you could just go ahead and click the next and so forth, and you might think that you can just click on the outer mesh and change the material, but you can't. I can show you. When you try to open components, there are no options. So we have changed the center, and then you would have to go and find the next one. You can see it's this one, and you could of course write down what texture you used for the center outer mesh. I'm pretty sure it was this one. So you can see it sort of continues now a little better, but that's gonna take a long time to do. So there's a little faster way to do it, and you just find materials and you copy it, and now you have copied this setting basically. So you could go into the next one, and you will see that it is slightly faster. So that's a thing to keep in mind if you choose to use this type of outer mesh. And of course you can also recolor it like we tried with the mountains before, and make them a little more red, but again you would have to do it actually for each entity, so that's a little time consuming compared to the first type we used. Now let's remove it and move on to the last type of outer mesh you can use, and it is the type that you should use when you work on a campaign map. And a lot of people have been leaving comments about me trying to make tutorials about it, so you can learn how you can make your own campaign map for a mod or whatever. But I'm not going to cover that. Perhaps I will at some point, but I'm actually not working on the campaign map for Kingdoms of Arda, so I'm not very used to how you would do that, but I know you do it within the scene. And when you should use an outer mesh, you should use this type. There are some tutorials on TaleWorlds Forum, so feel free to go in there and see if you can figure out how to make your own campaign map. I will make sure to leave a link in the description, so if that is what you're trying to do, I would suggest you to look at that and perhaps message one of the people that have made the article on TaleWorlds, or perhaps some of the people commenting. And there are also a Discord for modding in general for Bannerlord. So if you have a problem and want some people to help you out, it's a very nice place to go and ask a question, and usually some people are very helpful, and you can actually figure out how to solve your problem within 20 minutes or a day or two. Anyway, the last type is you select terrain, you go to horizon, and you can see there's a tab called the mesh, so you can click on it and you could choose the outer mesh forest. And you can sort of see for our mountain, most of our map is pretty flat, but for our mountain you can see that it is sort of trying to continue the shape of your landscape. So if we had a lot of hills over here, it would also reflect in this white outer mesh. Now the problem I have with this is that in test mode it is just white, just like this, no difference at all. I haven't tested it out in custom battles, so I'm not sure if it tries to mimic whatever texture you have near the edges. Might be node based, not sure. I would hope that perhaps it's bugged at this stage, I sort of like the idea that it could continue whatever type of landscape you have created, but it doesn't seem to work, at least not in the sense that I had hoped. So that's the third type, and there's also the other one that is related to the campaign map, and I can't really tell you much how it works or anything, but I've seen some screenshots where it I think it looks pretty decent. I think we should move on to the next section. So we select the empty one to get rid of it again, and let's try, and I think I like this one actually when we changed it to the Valley Mountains. So let's try and place it again, and we again I would recommend that you place it first and then you try to move it around, and there we go, and then you can just lower it, and of course you can use B to increase the scale if you want these mountains to look insanely huge or anything. So let's try something like that, and let's try and change it to Valley. Maybe B is not the best one. Yeah, clearly much better. So we move on to the last part for this video, and it is smaller entities that you could use for outer meshes. So like before, you go to add entity and you want to get rid of this. You type border, and there might be other ones than these, but I'm familiar with those. So you can see that you have a sort of a small mountain here, and you can of course increase the size, and again don't keep the texture so much in mind when you place them, because you can just retexture it like any entity. So there are a lot of different types, and I think the most important thing is actually that you could change it like any entity. So you can tilt it, scale it, raise it up and down, and recolor it, and use a different texture, and so on. So let's say we want to do something like that, and you can just make it blend in better with some retexturing. This one looks a little different. You can see it sort of goes around the entire map. We have small mountains like this. So let's try and see if we can find something that looks nice. So let's try and make it look a little larger. Something like that perhaps. And perhaps we want it to look a little hilly in front of the mountains. So you could do something like that, and again try to cover your edges of your map. So creating some hills in front of it, and trying to find some textures that blend well into whatever outer mesh and border entities you have used. And one thing to always try and keep in mind when you do this is that you should go down to first person perspective sometimes, just to sort of give you an idea how it actually looks when you play around. I mean, when you're standing up here and having a fight, it actually looks quite nice, I would say. Perhaps you should try and cover that, or place another entity with hills and blend it in better. For something like this where you have used water, I also recommend that you try to cover these type of lakes that appear, unless you think it looks good. I guess you could try and play around and make the river sort of continue, or have a more natural looking lake. That's all up to you. Anyway, thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.